Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Ricconi. Jesus reminds us to watch for the signs of his return. Today we will explore further what we are seeing in our times that line up with what signs he said would indicate the potential of the end and his return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, Kathy. Here we are, End Times Friday, heading toward the end of August, and lots and less stuff going on in this world, as you can imagine. It's really something. Just to give an update of a few things. First of all, the economy. There's actually a statement now that it's officially in a recession.
Have they said that now? Okay.
Well, it depends on who says it.
I was going to say
the government is it. They don't want to admit that. But again, it's all related to statistics and what's happening and what is going to happen. And companies are already laying off people. Big companies like Walmart, Target, other companies are laying off people because they get ahead of it generally. And know that, okay, it's going to shrink and their volume's going to shrink, revenue's going to shrink, so we got to save expenses. So they, because of their modeling, they can actually predict things better now. And since they're predicting the recession to go a certain way, it means less revenue. That means I got to cut my expenses. Well, then let's get ahead of it, and that's what they do. And now, interesting enough, and this is where the whole economic structure is. It's called it multiplies up and down. And that is when you start to shrink, it actually accelerates the shrinking because now people don't have the money to spend and they spend less.
Right.
And then the economy contracts and other people then get affected, restaurants, services, purchases, etc. And there's less volume for them and then they got to shrink. So it's it's called a self-fulfilling economic prophecy. So that's happening. And inflation at the same time. Inflation's accelerating, and people are struggling with things like gas and food and that kind of thing. So there's a real contraction at the middle level. And I was just listening actually to a interview of a lady who was talking about she and her friends have stopped doing a variety of things because they can't afford the gas to go those distances that they used to go, so they're doing things now more close at home, and they're not going out as much.
Right. It's interesting. I was just reading the other day too about, interestingly enough, Walmart was one of the places, but the difference is what they've seen in this last quarter. Walmart is actually increasing its sales because higher income people during times of inflation and recession tend to steer away from big ticket items, and then they start buying more at the Walmarts and stuff, and things like Applebee's is doing well as a restaurant. It actually increased and grew, whereas some of your nicer restaurants that people like to go to, now people are going back to spending it more what's considered a value restaurant. And so I think across the board you're seeing a change in patterns of what people are doing in response to the economy.
Yep. And then on an international basis, a couple of interesting things are happening. First of all, Israel was bombarded with rockets from the Gaza Strip, and their Iron Dome basically handled them all. And there were like hundreds and hundreds. And because of, and everybody to understand how they set up the Iron Dome, is think of we're all familiar with video games that
Right.
you have a joystick, and if you have something you can shoot it with that joystick. Well, they literally brought in now, by the way, in Israel, everybody, including men and women both over 18, all have to go into the military for a couple of years at least. So they're young. and they're talented in terms of having learned how to play video games. Mm-hmm. So they recruited kids who were exceptional at it, and the way that they do the Iron Dome is just a gigantic video game. Literally, the screens are out there. They're in a room. I don't know if you ever saw did you ever see the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick?
If I did, I don't remember it.
It's where where the machine took over and he was gonna create, but because he's playing a game, the machine was gonna create war. So they're in this room with all these big video screens, and that's what it's like. They have these gigantic video screens at various places, and these kids are operating really with joysticks. And when a missile comes up, they calculate the system, because remember it's connected to radar, so I can now see it as launched. It's up in the air. The system evaluates, is this going to hit a populated area or a wilderness area?
Right. And they only intercept ones that are going to a populated area,
that's right.
Correct?
So the wilderness ones, they just let go and hit, because it doesn't really harm anything other than, the local trees and stuff. But if it's going to hit populated, then it alerts the kid, shoot it down.
Right.
And they shoot it down. And they're like 99.9% effective at it, and but they had a barrage of them that were literally hundreds and hundreds of them that were attacked. And so Israel, because remember, they're protecting themselves. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah? So what they do, not only do they make sure they don't get harmed, but they go after them. Mm-hmm. And they go after with military jets and their own missiles, and they don't go after populated areas. They go after the military bases and the supply places.
Right.
And they did. And they went after them. And so and this is Hamas in southern Israel and northern Egypt, and Hezbollah. They said, okay, how about a ceasefire? And they have another ceasefire, but it was a test. Mm-hmm. It was a test of, is Israel still capable of doing this? And the answer is yeah. And so this whole thing, and they remember in the process where their government has collapsed, and they have to form up a new government. So that's being readied right now to go back and vote.
Right.
And then it'll be interesting.
How long will it take till that comes into being?
Well, the vote will probably be in the next 30 days or so.
Okay.
And then we'll
see.
So
this is probably when they expected this to be a weak spot that they could potentially attack.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Because there wasn't supposedly the same people in charge, and so.
Right.
But the system works anyway. So they'll go into a vote. They won't get a majority, and they'll have to do this coalition again, and we'll see. If they can form a government. So it'll be interesting to see. But God is certainly protecting them. And then, as we know, Russia's involved with Ukraine. Still fighting that war. And then China is actually demonstrating their technology by kind of showing their might of what they can do, and they're doing exercises to demonstrate that technology. And so what's happened is we've seen now that Russia's technology and capability is actually pretty fair and to weak, but China is superior to us. So remember, Gog and Magog formed together, and that's why China and Russia are coming together economically. And then I believe it's Russia saying, I need to link with you. And remember, Gog and Magog is the ones that come against Israel.
Right. And Russia has realized they are not as strong as they thought they were.
Right.
Yeah.
So they pretend to be, but they're not. So really, really interesting stuff that we're learning about the dynamics of the world. And as we, again, think about, and we'll talk more about the movement toward one world government and what that looks like, which is, what we've described as the beast, and how that works. So let's talk a little bit about that. We've talked about Daniel, and he talked about the four beasts. Three were these, after him were these countries, or national governments that took over. And so it was Persia, then it was Greece, then it was Rome. And they basically ran the world through their one world government as best they could. And then he said the fourth beast is different than that one. Mm-hmm. And he implied, because he said, what's that all about? Why is that one different, and what does that mean? And he was told, because this is at the end, and it's completely different than you're seeing, because it's not a national government, it's something else, and it's got 10 horns. Mm-hmm. And so there's 10 heads that form this one world government called the beast. And out of that beast, there is one that wasn't one of the part 10, but was part of the group, steps in and takes over 3 of them, and basically moves them out of the way. And so now he's joined the 10 as basically number 7. And then he goes from 7 to 5 to 3 to 2 to 1, and he becomes the Antichrist. Mm-hmm. And then the beast then is translated into the one world government with Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet, all forming this unholy trinity to operate under the world to try to, again, thwart God's will on earth and to take over the world. That's their goal. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting process. So we've talked about Daniel's, and we started into Revelation that describes it again. So let's go to Revelation 13, 1 through 10.
1 through 10? Sure. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints.
Okay. So remember, the whole book of Revelation is written by John, and his instruction when he is on the island of Patmos and he's taking up into the spiritual dimension is write down what you see.
Right.
So he's observing this. Okay, so when he's now talking about the beast, in verse 1, he says, the beast that I see has 7 heads and 10 horns. So when does he see the beast? It's when the Antichrist has already made his move. Because Daniel said remember he describes there's
10
heads,
right?
And one who's not one of those 10 steps up. He's there, so he would be right behind it. And we might even know if people research ultimately when that happens, well, who's all part of that group? Well, it's these 10 and these next people. He's one of the next people.
Okay.
But by this time, John says that Antichrist is in place, and he's already there. The 10 are still there, so whatever structure it is, which I believe is more of a corporate structure than it is a governmental structure. So it's not nations. I think it's more corporate in entity, and so it implies he hasn't done by force or had them fired or terminated. It's just that they accepted a lesser place amongst the group, and now he's in charge of those 3. And so there's still 10, and he's one of the 10 now, the 7th. He said, it's very powerful, fast, powerful, able to do it. And then they worship, this is interesting, they worship the dragon. Who's the dragon? Satan.
Satan.
They worship the beast, which they have been, and then they're understanding that. So now, by definition, would anybody purposely, and maybe some do, I guess they're Satan worshipers, but the average person in the world, would they knowingly worship Satan?
I would think not. Yeah.
It wouldn't be
that.
Because it would still be perceived as wicked and evil. But remember, by this time, and that we talked about this in Isaiah, that good has become evil and evil has become good, so that evil is now considered good. So when they worship the dragon and they're worshiping the beast, they're, in their view of it, I'm talking about the average person in the world, their view of it is what?
That they're actually worshiping good.
It's good. So, okay, so now, we know Satan is kill, steal, and destroy. We know he's a manipulator. We know he's deceptive. And he's wicked to the core. But in this case, to the person in the world, he appears as what? An angel of light. It doesn't appear to be, let's say, oppressive, or it doesn't appear to be, wait a second, that doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel good to me. Whatever happens, it feels good. So he's extremely deceptive to set up this moment where he solves the world's problem of the economic collapse, and then I'm going to offer you what you would consider good. And by the way, and this is important, for the average person to consider anything good, it has to be good for who?
Good for them.
For me. So I evaluate it because I benefit from this. So it looks beneficial, and they're unknowingly worshiping the dragon because the beast is promoting this new system, and at this time it's you're worshiping the system. Yep, isn't that fantastic? Yes, you who are leading this system, isn't that great? And by and see, John sees, really, even though they don't understand it, they're worshiping Satan. And they're following him because, and it's really simple. Do you remember when Peter, was claimed Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of God? Hey, fantastic! Upon this church, I'm going to build build on your faith. I'm going to build the church. He says, I'm going to go to my death, and Peter says, I'll never let that happen to you. And Jesus said, get behind me, what?
Get behind me, Satan.
Satan, because see, he had flipped from following God to following self and not following God.
Right.
So that when John says they're worshiping the beast, because why? They're not worshiping who?
God.
Interesting enough, the only people worshiping God at this point is who? The remnant. Everybody else thinks the system is God. They're God anyway, and it's good, and they see it as good. So he says then the Antichrist starts stepping up and starts to come against the saints and starts to persecute them. So during that first 3.5 years, again, this would be a indicator as to be careful not to be absolute that you think the rapture is pre-trib, because he's persecuting.
There's an indication here that
he's persecuting
somebody,
Christians.
So,
and by definition, there's Christians here.
Right.
People can say, well, yeah, they come to know Christ afterwards, but it doesn't say that, and it doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't appear that many come to know Christ afterwards when the tribulation comes. So then he now begins to describe even further, okay, what's going to happen about this system and about this beast. So read verses now 11 in chapter 13, 11 through 18.
Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, and that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one that has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has an understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666.
Okay. So everybody knows about the 666, the name. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and we got to back up a minute, is that it says that back in verse 4, who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him, and he was given a mouth to speak against the believers. Mm-hmm. So when it first sets up, that, remember, it's the beast with 10 heads, and the 10 heads have, now gone to 7, and the Antichrist is now one of those 10.
Okay.
And he starts to, and we'll see this later, but he goes, in through the process of becoming synonymous with the system or the beast.
Okay.
So now it's in the form of that person. He's representing the authority of that, and he's basically now leading it all. Doesn't mean those 10 are gone. It just means they've let him be the guy.
Okay.
And he's
so at this point, the way you're explaining it, just making sure I'm understanding this correctly, is where before we were saying the beast is really the system and the Antichrist is separate, he's raising up. At this point, that really becomes one and the same.
Correct.
Because he is raising up to lead the system, and then that becomes synonymous, the beast and the Antichrist.
That's right.
Okay.
And so now it's him, because then John says, okay, it's him. And then another beast, another person, steps up, and he said he's got 2 horns like a lamb and speaks like a dragon. Okay. We know something about this. And John, remember, has used this symbol throughout Revelation. Who's the lamb?
Well, the lamb would be Jesus.
Jesus. See, John knew the sacrifice, the person of Jesus is the lamb that is to be worshipped and to ultimately have all the power. And it's the lamb. He said, well, here is a guy that looks like a lamb. Mm-hmm. Okay, so by definition, he is identified as what? A Christian. Mm-hmm. I'm supporting.
So this becomes the false prophet.
The false prophet. I'm the false. And the false prophet would be someone who claims to be of God, looks like he's of God, claims to be a Christian, but by the way, he will have also broadened out to be universal, because there will be more than just Christians, and we know that today. That actually the Christians are becoming more and more in the minority, and the true believers are becoming even more of a minority. So that anybody who steps up at this point is going to be appealed to on a worldwide basis, but anybody that's religious will be a follower and say, well, that guy says that it's good. And that's what he does. And so he's like the lamb, so it looks like he's a religious, good person, but speaks like the dragon. Okay, so if he's actually of the dragon, what is he doing? Deception.
Lying and deceiving.
Lying and deceiving. And he's, processing that it's all good, but John sees it for what it is. It's the dragon. It's the false prophet. And he says that he has authority coming from the dragon. So there is supernatural stuff being able to go on. And it looks like, remember we saw before that he was wounded and looked like he died. But it was now healed, and he's back. Basically, as you think about it, the simplicity of, if everybody would say he died and now he's alive, what would they say? He's been resurrected.
Right.
Okay, what are they doing?
Which gives credence to him as the Christ / the Antichrist, because
exactly
he is false.
And that when you look at it again, what is he doing? He's what we call co-opting what the truth is of God. He's looking like it, though he's not it. So what is he doing? I'm raising my son the same way that Christ was. Now, it doesn't really happen, but it appears that it happens. And he's healed, and he was dead, now he's alive, trying to persuade the world that this is really the God that we need to be worshiping, and look at that. And then he says he deceives everybody with the signs in the sight of the beast, that and tells everybody to do what? Worship the image of the beast. So this is interesting. And remember, God said this right at the very beginning to Moses. Don't ever do what? Make an image.
Worship an image. Yeah.
Do never even attempt to make an image of me, because I'm not confined to something that you could dream up. Come in and learn who I am, because I'm omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent, and I care about you and can lead and guide you and speak to you. So don't place me into what you would consider to be an image. Don't ever do that.
Right.
Because you can't. Well, in this case, the false thing, because he said, well, let's make an actual image of the beast. And now guess what? Everybody in the world, we want to do what? Worship that image, and get them used to worshiping that image, because it's more than just a system now. And think of how clever this is. Starts out being the system, and then it turns into the person, and that person turns into what? The idol, to be worshipped and become thought of as not just another human, but a God. And by the way, everybody accepts that as being what? Good.
Right.
So the key is, how do we handle all that? And we'll get into that next time, because and it starts to allude to this. He said, hey, by the way, everybody's going to have a mark.
Right. You're going to have a choice to make here.
And we'll talk next time about, John says it's on the forehead or on the wrist. So we're going to talk about that, because I think it's pretty interesting. Remember what John's observing, and what is that? And we know that the mark is 666. And there's something about that mark that we need to understand. And what is that mark, and how do we respond to the mark? And what does that mean to us? So we'll get into that next time, because he set it up with, now the Antichrist is all in place to be worshipped. And by the way, guess what? Everybody who's not of God, because he said, if you don't worship it, what's going to happen to you? You get killed.
Right.
Well, that's going to be problematic. So we'll see what that looks like. It doesn't mean universally. It just means that there'll be believers who are of the remnant that are going to be killed because they're not willing to worship the beast. So, of course, that frightens everybody.
Right.
That, well, gosh, I don't want to have that happen to me, and how am I going to handle that? And probably I'm in a cave, and isn't that going to be awful? And we'll talk a little bit about that next time. So we'll pick it up. Lots to talk about this beast, and the Antichrist and the mark of the beast, and how to get into the depth of that that we need to be ready for. And God, that's why God showed it to us. So we'll pick this up next time and try to deal with it.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom, and thank you for joining us, everyone. If you have questions about this, be sure to send them in at questions@afjministry.com, and we will bring them on the podcast and discuss them.
Yep.
Thanks so much, and have a blessed day.
Yep. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.